As we are waiting for everyone to hop on, thank you for being here. I'll go through some housekeeping and then we'll get into our conversation a little bit with our panelists. We've got someone joining from Israel, Ukraine, Arizona, Vermont. This is great. Thank you, everyone, for being here. This is really awesome. So let me jump in to make sure that we're able to use the time effectively. We've got a jam-packed schedule for today. We've got a lot of content and topics to cover, and I want to make sure we're able to get to it and you all can hear from our esteemed panelists and everything that they have to share. If this is your very first session that you've done with us, welcome. We're really glad you're here. We've got some rules of the road for how we handle these. First and foremost, this is a conversation. This is for all of us to connect and chat with each other and to learn. So as you all are doing in the webinar chat, keep talking, keep interacting, keep sharing ideas, keep asking questions of each other. The chat is a great place for you to connect with other attendees. Second, we'll be sharing the recording and resources after the session. That's so you can stay engaged. So one of the most common questions we get is, will we get the recording because you love all the information that's being shared? The answer is yes. Make sure that you are kind of tuning in and taking notes as you go through, but we'll share all of the resources after the fact. You don't need to do a screenshot of any of the slides. We'll make sure you get all of this. So this is your opportunity to stay engaged and stay chatting. And third, if you have any questions that you'd like answered by myself or any of our panelists, feel free to use the Q&A tab in the Zoom toolbar. That allows us to be able to see which questions are coming through. The chat goes pretty fast and we don't want to miss anything. So we'll only be looking at the Q&A tab for any questions that we pose to our panelists to make sure that they are able to chime in, answer your questions, or if there's any follow-up that we need to do for those that ask questions that are specific to your use case, we'll do it from the Q&A tab. So chat in the chat, ask questions in the Q&A tab. Pretty clear. Who am I? Why am I talking for this first little bit? Hi, nice to meet you all. If we haven't met or you haven't been in one of our sessions before, my name is Luke Ranaveau. I'm the Senior Director of Customer Marketing here at Bitly. I use the pronouns he and him, and I'm very excited to host today's conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun to learn from those who are out in the real world, who are having conversations with their audiences and customers and how they do it. That's the purpose of today, for us to learn from each other. We're going to do formal intros, but I'm very excited to have our three panelists here today. They're going to chat a little bit more about how they put connection strategies to work and how they think about connecting with their audiences more holistically. They've got really, really great insights. They're getting creative with how they're connecting with their audiences, and they're all very finely tuned with how they think about making an impact and measuring the impact of their efforts. And so from today, you're going to hear a ton of great strategies, real life examples. You're going to be able to ask some questions. So excited to get into it. First things first, though, I do want to kind of set the stage for what we're up against and where we are. Obviously, for those of you who have joined us for sessions in the past, you know that learning from others is really important. But getting into specifically what we want to learn from other folks that are in our industries, that are in the space, is critical for us to understand how we can put these strategies and these things in practice for ourselves and for our audiences. And a big part of that is understanding where we are today and what's going on. What is going on in all of our spaces? What we know is that there is a lot of noise out in each of our individual markets, in our industries, and the channels that we're trying to communicate. We know that there's a lot more pressure on all of us to drive meaningful interactions with our users and our audiences and our customers every point that we get. And we know that our audiences are getting bombarded with messages from every which way. We also know that it really is a user and a consumer's world. They have the opportunity to decide which businesses that they interact with, which audience touch points that they want to engage with, and where they want to do it. Everything from having phones in our pockets all the time to more opportunities for us to be more discerning of how we engage with different audiences is really, really important for us to consider. And all that leads to is that creating connections becomes harder and harder. We at Bitly have found that as we've talked to you all and the types of strategies that you're trying to implement and what you're up against, we've found that it is really hard to find those spaces to make connection with your audience and with each other. And you're relying on tools and on platforms and on your peers to learn how you can do that more effectively. And it doesn't matter if you are a creator and you're starting a business, or you're working within an enterprise space and you've got a ton of teammates and you're still trying to find ways to connect. It is more challenging than ever to find and create connection with your audiences. Why? It's because people are buying and consuming information and engaging with brands and the organizations that they work with, kind of wherever they are. As you can see here, we are going about our days and finding information where we are. We want it to be very easy and clear of how we create a connection point with our audience members. We also expect a lot of those updates, that information, the real-time notifications to come to us where we are. We want it to be either on our phone or sent to our email with really specific and personalized information. We're not just reliant on waiting for someone to get back to us. It used to be that our expectation for being able to get a customer service response was in the hours or maybe even in a day. Now, all of us, our users and audience members and consumers, we expect it to happen a lot more quickly. And so we want to make sure that we're getting to a point where you can actually meet your audience where they're at, and you can use a platform to be able to accomplish that. So before we get into the conversation that we're going to have with our panelists today, I just want to give a bit of a primer for the way that we see businesses are using this overall to be more effective with how they're connecting and how they're meeting their audience members where they're at. First and foremost, we're seeing that folks are showing up wherever their customers are engaged. We are all operating within the world, and we see opportunities to find out more information. As you can see here, QR codes is a great way to do that. But most importantly, it's making sure that we are navigating alongside our consumers and our audience members as they go throughout their day versus asking them to come to us. We're also looking more and more for more reliable, easier to access, and frictionless information about the products and services that we are using. We want to make sure that when we are going to take that action to click a link to find more information, that it's trusted, that I know it's going to be on the other side of it. I know exactly what I need to do on the with that information that you're sharing with me. We find more and more that people are looking for real memorable experiences. Once I do scan a QR code, once I do actually take that action to click on the link you sent in email, or I found on social media, or I found on a flyer, I want to be able to make sure that it's memorable for me. It stuck out. It was a brand building moment. And so how are we taking the opportunity to create these new and memorable digital experiences? And then finally, and most importantly, probably that underlies all of these efforts, I want to be able to understand what's actually working. I want to know which of these strategies that I'm deploying are the most effective. How am I staying on top of the trends of what I'm seeing with my audience, of what's working, what's not working, what they're gravitating toward? Where are the places that they're engaging with me more and more? All these things are really important. And oh, by the way, we want to be able to do this at scale and want to be able to do it securely and reliably. More and more, we're looking to trusted sources. And so the way that you connect with your audience needs to stay very, very trusted, and something that they can rely upon is not only safe and secure, but also comes with your brand and helps reinforce the brand that you've built. So making it connect, right? What does that all mean? Why are we here to talk through all of this? It's because we want to talk about how we can make it all connect. And so as you can see here, we've got one of our go-to fun examples, which is Danny's Donuts, is kind of our go-to brand that we talk about a lot and how they create connection. But creating connection means creating connection points online and offline. It means enabling easier, faster, and more seamless ways to engage. It means designing memorable experiences, and it means measuring what matters and what works. We're going to talk a lot more about Danny later on and the different strategies that she deploys for her business. But before we get into that, let's hear from some folks that are doing this on the ground in their day-to-day, in their strategies. I'm very excited for us to talk through and to hear from these three. So let's start with intros across the board. Craig is the digital marketing officer at Mind in MidHertz. Marie is the Director of Strategy, Partnerships, and Communications at New Voices. And Mill is a founder and CEO at Simply Multimedia. Thank you all three for being here. I really am excited to hear from you all. As I mentioned, folks, if you have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop into the Q&A section of our chat. Craig, why don't we start with you? Why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your organization?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really great to be here. So yeah, I'm Craig. I'm Digital Marketing Officer for Mind in MidHertz. Mind in MidHertz is a local mental health charity that provide frontline wellbeing services to our local community in Mid Hertfordshire. Not only that do we do that frontline wellbeing services, we also provide training and development for businesses as well in our global community and nationally as well. So yeah, that's us. Yeah.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, Craig. Marie, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization?
Hi there. My name is Marie Clark. As Luke said, I lead the strategy, communications, and partnerships at the New Voices Foundation. The foundation works with underserved entrepreneurs, helping them to launch and execute and grow and scale their businesses. We do that sort of broadly speaking by providing non-dilutive capital in the form of grants, learning programming, and networking opportunities.
Excellent. Thank you. And Mil, tell us a little bit about you and the agency that you lead.
Hey guys, my name is Milu, or I also go by Mil. I'm the founder and CEO and marketing strategist at my agency, Simply Multimedia, where we work with creators and brands that are looking to disrupt in their industry. Our services are mainly focused on marketing as a whole, social media, PR. Yeah, and I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I'm based in Austin, Texas.
Excellent. Thank you, all three of you. We're going to turn off our screen share for a second because it is about the conversation and the Q&A that we have. Why don't we start just getting a little bit deeper into the audiences that you all serve and what kind of makes them different and unique? And so, Craig, why don't you start us off? Who specifically do you all serve, and what are the types of audience and audience members that you have to take into account when you're thinking about how you create connection?
Yeah, sure. So for us, it's a really massive, wide audience because the people that we want to connect with are people that might have mental health struggles or maybe are family of members of people that are struggling at that time. So our audience needs to be reached, I guess, in lots of different ways. That's offline and online. So we have to be really conscious about the kind of content that we're going to be creating. So yeah, our audience can be anyone and everyone at any given moment, really.
Yeah. Yeah. And having to think across the different types is definitely something that you all have to take into account because the way that you offer services meets different needs and the demographics may match that as well. That's really helpful. Marie, why don't you answer the same question? Tell us a little bit more about your audience.
Sure. Our audience is probably more homogenous than what Craig described. So we're primarily serving entrepreneurs that are relatively early stage. So these are people who, may have, started their businesses, 6 to 12, 18 months ago. And they are looking, if we're sort of engaging with them virtually, they're primarily looking for resources, right? And so in this audience, of course, it's a national audience. It's not, limited to one region or one locality in the U.S. But these are U.S.-based entrepreneurs that are spread out primarily in major cities. But what they all have in common is that they're very early stage entrepreneurs. But I think the pain point for us is figuring out how to engage with, the audiences and the entrepreneurs that are at different ages, right? So they might be at the same stage, but different ages, right? So that what that means, practically speaking, is that some of them are more technically savvy, technologically savvy than others, and so for us, that's a major challenge, is trying to figure out how to make sure we're reaching sort of everyone where they are and with the skills that they do have.
Yeah. Yeah. The commonality across all different types of entrepreneurs, but the nuance depending on, where they are and their life journey or even in time, as you'll talk about a little bit later, is really, really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Mil, why don't you take us home? Tell us a little bit about your audiences that you serve, maybe even the audiences that they serve, knowing that you work with clients.
Yeah, so of course, with the agency, we have clients where we do both personal brands as well as corporate brands. But what I think is really interesting is whether we see, of course, in general with corporate brands as well, have a lot of different audiences, but even personal brands and including my own brand, you almost always have at least two audiences where you attract one, clients or people that want to work with you potentially. And secondly, you attract people that want to kind of do what you do. And so it's been very interesting to kind of serve, across the board where we have clients who have in-person events, as well as, a broad audience across the US where a lot of it is, remote and service-based. So yeah, it's been interesting and a variety of different challenges I think that we all have.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting how there's a commonality in that you all have to navigate different different needs from your audiences, although there might be a universal reason why they're coming to you or the services that you provide. But even within that, there is those nuances too, and where they're interacting with you. Why don't we go in kind of reverse order? Amelia, why don't you start us out? Tell us a little bit about then, based on that audience, what types of connection strategies that you employ to reach them. So specifically, how are you trying to build campaigns, to create opportunities for connection between your agency and the brands that you serve, and then their audiences? What are your go-tos?
Yeah, so I think the major one right now is where we really hone in on long form strategies, where I think if we talk connection and especially through content, and there's a lot of AI involved nowadays, where long form is really where you can build a proper connection virtually if you're not meeting with someone in person because they have to spend more time with you. And so we try to really, even with clients as well as our, agency and my personal brand, is to start off with long form content and then seeing, hey, how can we connect the dots from there? Where again, if we're talking AI coming in, is we can repurpose that across social media. We can turn it into blogs, or are these going to emails? And then at the same time, tracking where that traffic came from. So yeah, I think that is really our go-to strategy now to be more efficient.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Marie, same question. Marie, I think you're muted.
Thank you. For us, I think it's strategies where we are prioritizing, those strategies that allow us to build long-term relationships with entrepreneurs, right? And that allow the entrepreneurs in turn to build relationships with each other. The work that we do, community building is such a big part of it, right? And so creating communication strategies and connection strategies that allow entrepreneurs to not only stay connected to us, but stay connected to each other is super important for that peer-to-peer networking that we want to have. And then the other thing I would say is, strategies that also allow us to engage and to actually track that engagement with entrepreneurs. I know we're going to get to this question a little later, but that it allow us to track that engagement in both virtual and physical locations. So understanding where people are finding us, how deeply are they engaging with us, and how are they staying connected, post-event, whether it's a virtual event or a physical event in person.
Yeah. Super interesting the way that you have to navigate both. How are you driving folks to engage in the programming that you offer, making sure that you're understanding how it works, but even that connection between each other, that is very organic. There's no way that you can control the way that they connect and continue to engage. And so having to navigate how to get creative, but also leave room for people to have organic connection. That's definitely a tall order. That's a challenge.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Very interesting. Craig, why don't you take us home on this question? Tell us a little bit more about your connection strategies based on your audience.
Yeah, so I guess for us, it's a really small team that are creating content, and so that connection strategy, it's like Mill said, that you're creating that long form pieces of content to begin with, to then create that smaller pieces of content. You break it up into some social media and whatnot. So I've been trying to do that for us. But prioritizing, I guess, it's the printed materials as well. That's a really big one for our services. So trying to create nice organic pieces of posters that have QR codes in them that can take people straight into the landing pages that we want them to go to, and just making that as accessible as possible, really. So it's those two things that we're trying to prioritize, really.
Yeah. Craig, you brought up the fact that you've got QR codes and offline connections you're trying to make. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you think about online versus offline interactions and how you start to decide where you deploy different tactics, whether it be sharing via digital communication methods or sharing through printed or in-person assets?
Yeah, so I guess with the QR codes, that are printed, it's again, yeah, it's those services really. We really want to drive people to access those services. So one of the unique ways that we did that was location-based posters, I guess. So putting them into very specific areas that we know that maybe our audiences that we were trying to connect with are going to be sitting in, and understanding whether or not they are actually there. And those QR code scans for those locations would determine two things really: whether or not the post is in the correct place, it's actually prominent, or maybe that target audience isn't actually there. And then we can make those informed choices about maybe we don't put those posters in that location, or we try and make sure that poster is in the right location in that venue. So that's one of the ways that I like to try and connect with our audiences online and offline, or bring them from the offline to the online. Really, I guess that's one of the main aim there for that one. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like straightforward as you explain it that way, but thinking about how do we, you want to be able to track foot traffic, and you want to understand, like, in the real world, what is the example of like traffic we might measure to a website or something like that, the things that we have a bit more measurement around. In that same way, a QR code can act as a really straightforward and simple way to say, hey, these are services that we know our audience may want and need. Who's scanning the most in different locations, or based on the event content type or something like that. It sounds like you all are getting very tactical of saying, okay, based on which QR codes get the most scans, it tells us a little bit more about location, service need, and also what's resonating the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And we use like the campaign section of Bitly to sort of manage that and create unique UTMs, I guess, for each of those sub bits under the campaigns. And that's really allowed us to see at a glance as well, like where those people are sitting from that campaign that we've set up for that post specifically, or service specifically. So yeah.
Yeah, I love that. One thing that this applies to, I talk to a lot of folks, and we often hear from folks in retail settings, but also in restaurants, that a QR code, again, can tell you a lot more about when you have the most traffic. It can tell you what people are navigating to from that QR code itself, as you look at overall, like the journey that customers are taking to different parts of your website, even how many people are scanning to get the menu at a restaurant and then going to the drinks menu versus the happy hour menu versus the breakfast menu. Those are things that real folks, much like you described, Craig, just in a different use case, has said, this is what I use QR code tracking for. It tells me a lot more about what more I can do. So again, it seems quite simple, but it's a very clever way to deploy that in person and still get that same level of insight we get online. Marie, why don't you tell us a little bit more about how you're thinking about this as well? Like what are the different ways that you might look at connecting online versus offline?
For us online, we typically want people to take an action, i.e., like we're looking for people to register for something, right? So it's either or to complete an application. So we want people, to sign up for a webinar, apply for a grant, fill out a new business profile. And so we use we're not typically using QR codes for those. We've found that we've tried the mix of QR codes and Bitly links. We find Bitly links work better. So we're dropping those Bitly links on social assets across social media. The Bitly links will be included in the newsletter, those sorts of things. And then for offline, we're typically, we're leaning more heavily on QR codes offline. And so when we're doing, large events and, like, say, a large convention center, where there are a couple 100,000 people flowing through the space, and we're trying to drive traffic and convene people for a specific in-person event within the convention center, and we're hosting events throughout the convention center. We're using QR codes to help sort of convene and drive traffic, because there's no sort of on-site registration, if you will. We're just using the QR codes as sort of almost as way markers, or like signage, if you will, to drive people back to the part of the convention center for the event, or the networking reception, or the, whatever we're trying to drive people to. So we're using QR codes offline. We have started also using, Bitly links for in-person events as well. What we've found is that some of our events really benefit from us sort of extending what people are seeing online. So if you're, seeing a specific campaign hashtag or a specific program hashtag, and you're used to seeing it You're used to seeing that hashtag, you're used to seeing that co-branded Bitly link, with the same brand. We find that it's helpful to carry that across in person because people are like, oh, I remember that. And so it's very helpful to us in that way. But offline, typically QR codes, online, typically Bitly links, and where the action we're looking for people to take is ultimately to register for something, apply for something online. And in person, we're looking for them to physically, almost like to move traffic to that specific event that we want them to attend.
I love the idea of it as a way marker. Like a QR code can not only yeah, we can scan it, you can put a CTA around, but also it helps direct and guide what you want to happen in the in-person space. I love that idea. That's great. Very cool. Mil, take us home on this one. Tell us a little bit about how you think about the difference between your audience and how they engage online versus offline. And you're on mute.
Sorry. So yeah, with our clients, it really depends on how much time is spent offline and online, of course. But a big thing for our clients is just, data. And so Bitly has been used, whether it's QR codes or links, that we collect as much data as possible. So something that we like to do with those clients that do have, let's say, a big event coming up. From a marketing standpoint, they don't think about connecting the dots. So that's where we would come in and say, hey, you have this big event coming up. How can we tie in social media and the social media marketing to make it more of an experience versus, just you guys having the event, sharing recaps and whatnot. And so things like giveaways or, initiatives to follow us, to continue that conversation and know who was there with us in person or with the client, and then continuing to have them engaged on social and connecting those two has been a really fun way for us to showcase to the client how much everything is connected actually, right? When you do start using those things. And so that has been a great way for us to connect both audiences. And then even if it's just the offline audience, it's just a great way for us to collect data across the board because that is so important for clients and ourselves to make informed decisions in marketing.
Yeah. Any of our folks that are joining us that are in agencies, have worked in agencies, understand the emphasis around data and tracking. At the end of the day, what is the impact, right? Like you want to have a good understanding of that. So I really like that call out. That's great. We had actually Wayne jumped into the chat and shared that they often use both Bitly links and QR codes online to link the QR code to the Bitly link. Likes to give more people options to get it right and bigger space to see it, using that in newsletters. The combo is really helpful. I think that's a really great call out that Wayne shared of how do we give people options in the ways that they want to connect. And so it's not maybe one versus the other. It's making sure you're meeting your audience where they are and what they're most used to or most comfortable with engaging with. So I think that's a great call out. Let's get specific. I want to ask a few questions to all three of you as we've chatted even before we hopped in here today, learned a little bit more about the ways that you all are operating different activities and initiatives. And so Craig, let's start with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about like a recent campaign that you've run using short links or QR codes and how it worked? And I think just as importantly, what you learned from deploying these strategies.
Yeah, sure. So we have got a fundraising campaign. It's our flagship fundraiser that we do at the end of November, early December. It's called Mental Elf. Yes, it's a Christmas thing. A bit early to talk about Christmas, but yeah, it's a 5K family fun run, and so obviously we want to build that momentum quite early. We want to start putting things out there and getting the feelers out. So one of the things that we did was pulling it in our email banners or in our email signatures, creating a banner. So using a Bitly short link in there to take people to the landing page, and we saw like quite a significant click through on that because we're not really pushing it hard. It's just in the email signature, so it's really nice for people to see that in there. And if they want to, they can click it. It's not a hard sell at the end of the day. It's a nice soft sell. So that was really good. And so with that campaign moving forwards, we sort of took that offline as well. So we have posters, flyers, vinyl banners that we put out, and so QR codes on those as well. And again, it's the location-based ones. We didn't do it as like really highly specific locations because we were going to put out quite a lot of different posters and flyers, but we gave them to local businesses, and we had a specific location for local businesses, and so we can see whether or not those local businesses are displaying those posters in their windows, and maybe if we're getting click-throughs on that from the QR code scans or the short link on there as well. But the other thing that I think is really important to say as well is we use a custom domain for our Bitly short links. So it's not just bit.ly, it's actually mindandmidhearts.org/whatever custom bit on the end that we want on there as well. And I think that builds this trust as well when people are scanning these QR codes or typing in the short link as well. It's that sense of trust that we've built with that. I know for myself personally, or most of us here, if we scan a QR code and it says Bitly, we'll be like, yeah, that's cool. We know exactly why they're using that. But for those that don't really know what Bitly is, the average person on the street or whatever, they might not know what that means. And so that trust is really, really important to us.
I promise, Craig, I did not tee you up to say that. You brought that up, which is great. We did have folks comment in the chat about custom domains. I think you bring up a really good point of how do these different connection points actually build trust. And I think the custom domains for links makes a lot of sense. And so in those cases, just I want to walk through it, you are able to both customize the back half of it based on maybe the campaign or where you're pointing, but the actual root of it is also custom to your brand as well. So instead of bit.ly, it's your brand and your short link. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So ours is mindandmidhearts.org. It just dropped out the .uk at the bit there. So it's not a massively short, but when you scan the QR code and it has that, like on most iPhones, it says that bit at the beginning. Straight away they know that is actually us. So yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I want to underline that you mentioned was the fact that we are more and more wanting to have trust. And we mentioned this at the top of the things that we're scanning and that we're clicking on. And the scans are just as important. That URL that pops up when you hover over a QR code, just as important as the links you're sharing on social and email, newsletters, everywhere. So Craig brings up a great point of those custom domains are super helpful for not only building trust, but also, let's be honest, conversion for click-through rates and scan rates for both links and QR codes. So definitely check out custom domains if you haven't yet. That's great. Marie, you all run a lot of different types of events. You're kind of have an ongoing programming schedule, but you also participate in some larger event work as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you go about promoting the events that people are in the programming that you all run, and then how you participate in some of these larger experiences as well? I know you've had some experience that has really evolved over time, even over the last few years, that folks have gone from in person to not in person and then back. So walk us through that.
So I think like what we do is, pre-event, and if I'm, pre-event for our large in-person events, most of that promotion occurs online. It's virtual, it's through social media, it's through the newsletters. We're driving interest, driving traffic to our website or to a landing page. And we're largely using Bitly links to do that, right? And those will be, Bitly links that, might have a call to action, like, join us, join us at the Entrepreneur Summit. That's really long, but that's not that it wouldn't be that, but it's something like that, right? With a call to action. And so we try to make those actual campaign hashtags and Bitly links as memorable as possible, right? And so that's what we're doing sort of on the front end pre-event. And then at the actual event, as I said, when we're doing, and we have sort of one large signature event that we're doing at in a large convention center. That's, as I said, when we're leaning on those QR codes, because, there's we'll have, screens and physical signage scattered throughout a really large space. And we're really interested in figuring out, frankly, like, are you in the beauty section of this event? And where'd you find your way? Like, where were you when you learned about us, right? Where are entrepreneurs spending the majority of their time? Are they over in the main stage? Are they in the beauty section? Are they in the food and wine section? Where are they finding us? Are they in the tech section? Were they at the film festival? And so the QR codes are really, really helpful, those location those unique location-based QR codes, can tell us where people came from, what time of day they found us, how many times did, how many times did they actually, click on that UR code? What did they do after that, right? Did they just, take the opportunity to learn about that specific opportunity, event-based opportunity, venue-based opportunity, or did they take the next step and try to learn more about the organization? Did they, start to complete, an entrepreneur profile? And so it's really great to be able to follow, that from start to finish, to see, where the audience member or the entrepreneur started and where they ended, both physically and virtually. So did they actually, did they show up to the event? And what we've tried to do as well is, so if if it's a location based QR code that you're clicking on, we've also incorporated we've incorporated other QR codes at the events. We actually end up doing this both virtually and on in person. And so let's say you're showing up to a networking reception, or you're showing up to a panel discussion that's on a stage. We also are using QR codes at those events as well. So if there's an opportunity for folks to find out more information about, a 20-minute slot on fundraising, and they want to connect with the speakers after that session, there's a QR code that might flash at the end or in the middle. And we tell everybody literally, like, take out your phones, scan the QR code. Here's where you can find more information about how to, connect with the speakers, how to get additional information, that kind of thing. And so we're doing those kinds of things in real time. We also do those things actually in webinars. We're using QR codes at the end of events for people to fill out, a 3 or 4 question survey, those kinds of things. So we're, incorporating them sort of throughout the process from start to end.
What I really like about what you just shared is sometimes we have the binary in our heads of, I use links online and QR codes in person, but you're describing it even further of, how do I meet the audience with what the next action or intended action is? And so how often do we see folks actually pull out their phones to scan a screen, a digital display, or even a webinar in this case? And for folks that may have been worried, yes, there will be some QR codes to scan later on today, but how can we see where they're going and what we want them to do? Oftentimes we want to use our phone to fill out a form or to do something because we're on the run. And so one thing you're doing that's really smart, Marie, is matching the audience behavior on the back end, versus just thinking about, well, if I print, it's got to be a QR code, or if I put it online, it's got to be a short link. That's really smart. A lot of folks we see that are doing something very similar is, if there are often common use cases or common actions you want to drive folks to, is actually using a Bitly page on the back end as well. And so we can anticipate there's going to be feedback. Maybe there's resources we want to share. Maybe there's some common questions that we're always finding ourselves answer. So instead of having 4, 5, 6 different places that we point someone to, you can point them to one via the QR code or link. So it's a really good call of you knowing what you want your audience to do is what's driving whether you use a QR code or not. That's great.
And figuring out ways, I think the unlock for us was not just flashing that QR code, but actually saying, like, especially whether you're virtual or in person, actually asking people for the action that you want them to take. So you want them to scan the QR code, tell them, like, hey, we're going to pause. Everyone take out their phones, scan this thing. Because what we were finding is, if we just popped it up there, a third of the audience might take the action that we wanted them to take. But when we asked people to do it, it went up to almost 90% of people doing it in real time, right when you ask them to do it.
Wow, 90%. That's huge. And again, seems simple, right? But y'all are being smart about how you do it and say, let's take a beat. Everyone grab your phone, pull up the camera for those that aren't familiar, right? And hover and click. That's awesome. I love that. I love that. Emil, why don't we pivot over to you? Again, your angle is very much on making sure that you're running and building your agency and supporting your clients. But one thing that you've mentioned to us in the past is connecting the dots is really important. Tell us a little bit more about what that means and how you think about that in terms of looking at the metrics and the analysis of what's happening with those connection strategies you put out in the world.
Yeah, so earlier I briefly mentioned a client example where we're trying to, make a bigger impact for them and saying, hey, you have an an in-person event, how can we tie that into our online marketing? And really also, you market that back and forth. So while they may have a QR code in person that ties back to social, that they can continue that conversation, online, we're also pushing the event and having people go over to the booth and connect with people in person. So I feel like it's funny to see how that works both ways. And then something we see on the PR side of things, we do a lot of PR services and partnerships, strategic partnerships, is that you don't want to rely on someone else's data or another brand's data, especially if we represent creators and personal brands that are doing campaigns and we want to build case studies of, how well did things perform. Usually it's like, oh, we will tell you how many times people used your code or a discount or whatnot. And so now instead we're able to take charge and say, hey, we can report back on that data and make decisions way more quickly, right? Versus relying on other people.
Yeah, that's really, really helpful. I mean, you having to speak to client impact means you have to be really tight with how you think about your analytics. How are you using Bitly to do that? Are there any tactics you recommend for folks?
Yeah, so what we actually started doing is building out analytic dashboards for each client so we can showcase whether there's QR codes tied in that we provided to them for in person, or just links that we use across all different channels. We can showcase them, hey, what links are most clicked, what are people most interested in out of your service offerings, out of even if it's freebies and things like that, and provide them with that dashboard. And it's obviously with Bitly super easy to export as well, very professional. And for us marketers, having that knowledge to report to the client and say, here's what's happening versus, social just being social, especially when we're talking organic.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. All right, we've got time for a few questions from the audience. I want to make sure that we get into those. A few of them have been answered, which is great, but I'm going to pose them to our panelists as well. There have been a few questions about UTMs, and a few of you mentioned UTM. So I'll pitch it out. Anyone that wants to chime in, how do you think about UTMs and deploying those for your connection strategies?
Sure, I'll jump in here, I guess. So one of the ways that we use the UTMs is for those location-based QR codes. So if we're building a campaign in Bitly, it really makes it really easy to create that top-level campaign and then the various different places that we want to see those QR codes in. And then you have one link to a landing page, and then you just tick the box that says create a UTM for this, and each different subcategory or subpart of the campaign automatically creates those UTMs. So each QR code is a new link to that landing page essentially, and that works really, really well. And I guess after that allows you to take those UTMs through to any further analytics that you want to explore as well with things like Google Analytics. It all takes it straight through to that, so it's really, really powerful.
That's great. I love the way you frame that. Is like it basically creates a new URL to that same destination. So I know folks think about how they can use the same QR code in different spaces. You want to track the source sometimes, but sometimes you want to know specifically down to which location did we put this QR code in. Envision you're at a conference and you've got signage at the front of the booth, and maybe you've got signage then in the handout that you're giving to people, QR codes. The UTM parameters help you understand where those scans maybe came from. So a great thing for folks to take a look at. That's awesome. Okay, I think we hit on a lot of the other questions that we had. I've got one more bonus question for y'all in a second, but let me go back and share my screen because a few follow-ups that I want to make sure that we're able to get into as well. Please keep the questions coming. If you have more questions for our panelists, we'll make sure we come back and ask them a few before we close out here in about 15 minutes. So we did a little bit of panelist Q&A. Something I want to talk through is, I mentioned, we've got a go-to brand that we love here at Bitly called Danny's Donuts. She does amazing stuff with a lot of donuts and different desserts for her business that she's run. Spoiler alert, Danny is not real. There's not a real brand, but it's a great way for us to represent the way that people can navigate using Bitly and using the different connection strategies that we just heard from Craig, from Emil, and from Marie. These are ways that people can put this stuff into practice. So I just want to shine a light on the specific products you can use to put all of this great work into action. First and foremost, we've talked about short links a lot throughout this. We think of them in an online environment. In Danny's Donuts example, Danny's using short links to offer discounts, to share information on social. As you can see here, Danny is shortening her link using a custom domain. And so we've had a lot of questions in the chat around custom domains and how folks can turn it from just the bit.ly into using their own brand. The other thing that unlocks is you get really any custom back half that you might want. So you don't have to worry about someone else having taken 15 dash off. If it's your brand, you have access to that because it's depending on the root URL. We have just released actually 250 new top level domains or options. So you can do .shop, you can do .biz, you can do .link. There's a lot more out there for folks to be able to take advantage of. So highly recommend, much like Danny, you use links and you customize your links as much as possible. Danny is using QR codes. Danny is growing her business and she's getting out there and she's reaching audiences in the real world, IRL. And so how can she make more connections? One example that we love to point to that we hear from a lot of customers that Danny decided to employ as well is she's able to actually put a QR code within the postcard or within the signage that's going along with the donuts that people are picking up. And so that helps encourage repeat orders. We're going to talk a little bit more about commerce and being able to encourage repeat orders in a second, but that's a way that Danny and her team are putting this into practice as well. And then finally, Danny is using Bitly Pages. For those that aren't familiar, it's relatively new in the last 6 months or so, but Bitly Pages allows you to actually create really easily mobile-first landing pages that don't require a coding background or a developer bootcamp to be able to get up to speed on. You can easily plug and play the different modules and interactions. And like we were talking about earlier, oftentimes you have a lot of different resources that you want to share. You've got products you want to highlight. You've got forms you want filled out. Being able to host those on a Bitly page and point directly there allows you to funnel a lot of audiences to one space for the types of common questions that you might have or laddering up to a larger campaign. So highly recommend we all follow Danny's lead here and we employ all three of these tactics and then make sure that we're tracking everything that people are actually clicking on, they're scanning, and then they're taking action on because that's all available within Bitly. Back to our panelists. I know when we started doing our prep, we talked a little bit about kind of the things that you love to do. So I want to come back to you all. What's one go-to tip, trick, or hack that you recommend everyone in the audience start employing after today's session? Let's mix it up. Mil, we're going to start with you.
I was hoping you were gonna start with Greg. I know he had some really great insights earlier. But yeah, like kind of like I touched on with building out those analytics dashboards that you have the capacity of in Bitly. I mean it's not necessarily a hack, but it has really helped us. It costs a little bit of time upfront to set it up, but if you have that done, you have a great overview of all the links that you're tracking and a complete marketing overview. But I'd like to pass it on.
That's great. Marie, why don't you go? We're going to keep it switched up now. Marie, you're up.
I don't know that I have any like major, like sort of, I don't know if mine are sort of very technical tips or tricks. I think for us, it's just, we've had a lot of success using it for donation efforts, right? So using those, campaign hashtags and then pairing the back part of the Bitly link to make it both trackable and highly memorable. So for us, that would probably be sort of the biggest tip and trick, and just sort of making sure that there's a through line between, those connecting the dots between those campaign hashtags, the Bitly, the backlinks, and then whenever possible, of course, incorporating those QR codes, both virtually and in person.
Integrating your marketing efforts is absolutely a tip or a trick. That's beautiful. I love that. And being thoughtful about how you set this up, Marie, is something that I think we can all learn a lot from. Thinking about where are you pointing folks to, what are the different ways that you can find them. So that qualifies. That's a great tip. All right, Craig, how about you? What's one tip or trick that you recommend everyone start to employ after today's session?
Sure. I think one of my favorites is the redirects for the Bitly links and QR codes. And a really good example when I've used that is I actually created like an NFC business card, and I embedded the Bitly link into my business card, but I actually ended up changing the landing page that I wanted it to go to, and I just redirected that instead of having to you know, sync the NFC with my phone and all that. I just redirected it through Bitly, and it was really simple and quick to do. And then just as an extra little like tip or trick, I really like the custom QR codes and making that on brand. So we've got a lot of like great branding colors and stuff and icons, and I can do all of that with my QR codes, and it makes it really instantly recognizable as well to our brand. So yeah.
That's a great tip. And I'll just say what Craig shared is those redirects available in both short links and QR codes. So let's say you printed a QR code and you made a mistake, or you need to point somewhere new, or the campaign changed. I see some folks even sharing in the chat of thinking about sustainability and limiting the amount that we print. How can you point to a page or a destination, but then change it if need be? Really, really important. So I love that tip. Redirect and kind of give yourself a little bit of ease that even if you run a print job of business cards or a new flyer, that if you need to, you can always change the destination of that QR code on the back end. That's great. Awesome. Okay, a few things to cover, and then, like I said, keep asking questions. If we have time, we'll make sure we pose them to our panelists. A few things I want to make sure that we get into here. As promised, we do have a QR code within the session. A lot of the tips and tricks we just heard, in addition to the different ideas that we heard from our panelists, and some of the examples that Danny have are all actually featured in a kind of a long form story that lives in the Bitly blog. So go ahead and scan this QR code, or use this short URL to type it in and find out a little bit more. We'll share it in the follow-up resources for you all too, so you can make sure that you get access to it really easy within your inbox. But this kind of outlines the different ways you can look at using connection strategies across digital, online, from a growing business to a enterprise business that maybe has multiple franchise locations. It's all there with Danny and her donuts and everything that she bakes and serves to all of us. So you can check that out. One thing we also mentioned was thinking about how we drive people to take action. And a major use case we hear from a lot of our customers is oftentimes driving action is driving purchases. It's driving to a commerce experience, or people are buying products, they're finding updates on services. And so we did want to highlight one customer that couldn't join us today, but has been using Bitly in a really cool way. Fellow Products is a customer of Bitly, and they're actually a user of one of our more recent integrations. I just saw some reactions. People know Fellow. These coffee makers are pretty nice. They just had a new one that I have my eye on. It's on my Christmas list. The Aiden. These products are actually really cool. And the way that they deploy Bitly is really awesome too. We had a conversation with one of their product managers recently, and they shared a really cool way that they're using both QR codes on products and packages. And so they have a good understanding of how people can get some more information on the product packaging itself, but also some of their new products have Bitly QR codes on the product itself that allows for repeat scans. I'll talk about why in a second. They're also using short links and SMS messages. We saw in the chat, a few people are asking questions of how folks can use short links and SMS. A custom domain is really a standard and something that's needed to make sure that you're in alignment with any compliance with the phone carriers and SMS carriers. So make sure you do have a custom domain if you do plan to deploy SMS. But just as importantly, you can use SMS to drive promotions, to drive engagement, and now in Bitly, you can do it to drive commerce experiences, which is really, really fun. One thing that the Fellow team does that's really cool, and we want to share as inspiration for you all, is they actually have a text program, or kind of an opt-in subscriber program. They call it the anti-subscription program, which is great, but it allows them to actually drive more understanding of how people can pair coffee with their products, their Fellow products that they have. A really cool example of that is every week, if you sign up for this program, you'll get a curated recommendation of new coffee that you can get. And just through responding through the text, you can order 1, 2, 3 bags of coffee. again, just by replying in the text message conversation, which is really, really cool. So it starts with initiating the conversation by people signing up through a QR code or through clicking on a link via text or through other digital channels, but then you can actually drive the purchase through. So we're very excited that they are recently part of the most recent launch of new partner types that we have here at Bitly that launched officially today. So you all are among the first to hear about it, which is conversational commerce. You're able to drive new customer engagement through things like text to buy through Bitly and our conversational commerce partners. You can encourage repeat purchases through scan and text, much like the fellow products example I just mentioned. You can engage with your audience and see if they want your new product drop or they want to place a reorder really quickly right through text. And you can use text to pay to decrease the time to payment in many of these scenarios. So if your service offers bill payment or you want to make order updates, you can do all that through the text message conversation. The bonus for connecting Bitly with all these different experiences is you can easily customize the links and the QR codes themselves, and you get the power of the Bitly tracking on the back end. So everything we mentioned at the top of today's conversation in terms of branding these experiences, making them really easy for your audience to be able to take advantage, and then measuring the impact on the back end, all available through conversational commerce and the new features that we just launched. So wanted to make sure that we share that with you all too. I do see we have 2 minutes with our panelists here. So I want to pose one final question to you all. Let's see what we've got here. We've got a question around recommendations for using QR codes. I'm actually going to pose this to you all, and feel free to react to this one in the way that it's been asked, but also making sure that we dig into maybe other use cases. So someone has asked, do you have recommendations on incorporating QR codes into new market research, and which analytics have you found most helpful in developing campaign strategies? So let's maybe split this out. How have folks used QR codes to maybe gather feedback to get to understand a little bit more about audiences? And I'm not sure if you all have done any of that. And then we'll ask a second question around kind of which analytics are most important. So any of you have any experience using QR codes to generate feedback via forms?
Yeah, we use it for our training programs. So our trainers, when they go out to do their mental health awareness training to some businesses, they'll have a feedback form at the end of the presentation, and they'd ask people to scan the QR code to fill in the feedback forms, and then from that we've learned that, you know, maybe if they're asking for people to fill it in, like Marie says, lots of people will scan it, but then we're seeing that not everyone's completing it. So if they're not completing it, is the other questions too hard? Is it the form too long? And so we can go back and tweak that. So that's one of the use cases that we've got for the research side of stuff with QR codes. Yeah.
Awesome.
And we don't have like direct experience with audience research. I mean, we've done kind of what Craig just described at the end of sessions, both virtual and in person, asking people to fill out a very, very short feedback survey, no more than 3 or 4 questions. They can't be open-ended questions because those just don't do well for these quick surveys. But what I have heard is that we do have entrepreneurs who've described using QR codes on packaging or at the point of sale to collect, these are some of our CPG brands, to collect, you know, very basic sort of rudimentary demographic data about the customers that are buying their products. We have heard that, you know, including kind of like what you were describing for Fellow, you know, including QR codes on either the actual packaging or the product itself to gather some very basic, you know, information, demographic information about their customers.
That's great. I love that. And again, talk about meeting your users and your consumers where they are. They purchased your product, they brought it home. I'm in the comfort of my home setting up this coffee maker or whatever it might be, and I maybe want to scan to find more info and give some feedback or recommend like, hey, actually this feature would be really cool with this. So that's a really good tip for folks to think about. I love that. Emil, I'll pitch it to you to close this out.
Yeah, so we have never actually used direct forms to say, hey, a survey and things like that. But something we do a lot when we do in-person speaking and events is use a QR code, and similarly, like we talked about, you know, stop mid, you know, speaking and have people scan it, but make it a free download, something that people really want, like give something away for free that maybe usually would be paid, even if it's like a digital type of resource. And from there on, obviously, you now have their email in the first place and keep that conversation going over email. And what we've done in the past is invite people to a call, whether that's feedback, whether you end up converting them into a client or whatnot. Regardless, it's really, really useful for some market research, being face to face.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. I love that insight. All right, y'all. This hour has flown by. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. I appreciate everyone that stuck with it. And thank you to our panelists that made time in their busy days to join us and share some of your insights. For those of you that asked questions that didn't get answered, we will follow up and make sure that we get you answers for those questions in the Q&A toolbar. We will send out the recording, resources, links to everyone. Expect to see that hit your inboxes sometime tomorrow. And if anyone has any questions, wants to join us as a future panelist, wants to form the topics that we talk about next time, shoot us a note over at community@bitly.com. Community@bitly.com. Don't worry, I'll drop that in the email as well. But thank you everybody for being here. Thank you for joining us. This has been a lot of fun. We will see you at the next customer conversation. Craig, Emil, Marie, thank you. You are the best. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you on the next one.